as you know, the voice of God. The voice of God. First, what is the voice of God? You must have a clear understanding as to just what God's voice is. Otherwise, how are you going to be one with it? How are you going to merge in it? What you have to do to really benefit from oneness with God. So the voice of God is the Word, the holy vibration, not the word printed in the Bible or spoken of the Scriptures, but the holy vibration of the great one consciousness of God, plus the power behind it, which has made all things. That is the voice of God. That is what we must know. It is called by many different names according to the different religions. It is called the Amen of the Christian religion, the Om of the Hindus, the Amen of the Mohammedans, and the Hum, H-U-M, of the Tibetans. But it refers to the same underlying holy vibration, the great Holy Ghost, the Comforter of which Jesus spoke. For instance, you take a conch shell, and blow it, and that sound will penetrate this whole room. And it will go on penetrating all space. An expanding sphere. So, likewise, is the holy vibration, the voice of God. The great cosmic sound of Om, an expanding sphere which takes in not only this little room and you and a few of us, but it takes in all things in that vibration, that holy vibration. Now the key is this. If you can merge in that sound, if you can be one with that sound, where does that sound go? Throughout all creation. In fact, creation is the product of that vibration. Therefore, if you can merge in that holy sound of Om, you too expand as it does through every particle of creation, world without end. Now that gives you a different idea of the great voice of God. It is something real, and in that holy vibration, not only is the vibration known as sound, or the vibration known as light, not solar light, but astral light, spiritual sound. But not only do we find those things, but we find the great consciousness of God Himself. Love. That's the reality. The feeling aspect of the holy vibration is God's love. So realize that. Then this holy vibration, the voice of God, becomes something much more tangible, something much more real. And so, Om is the special vibration of the cosmos. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth, and they were without form and void. They were in His consciousness as ideas and concepts. Then He created light. And from that light, all things have come. From that one vibration. Just like in your motion picture, all things come from the one underlying light, producing light and shadows. So in this world, all things come from that one underlying vibration. The Spirit of God moved. The consciousness of God moved. And from that one consciousness, all things have come. The movement of that consciousness, with its aspects of which I have just spoken, constitutes the voice of God. Not an idea. Not an idea, intangible, but something real and something you can possess, merge in and be one with God Himself. Realize the voice of God must be something different than just an idea. And so if you tune in, realize if you tune in with the voice of God, as that voice penetrates all space beyond time and space, so you will be that penetration beyond time and space into God Himself. These are truths. I'll read what our Master has to say about this from his autobiography. The Old Testament prophets, the seers of all lands and ages, spoke from that state of consciousness, that expanded state of consciousness, not from, I do this, I do that, you do what I say and everything will be right. That's no good. That's limited. But they spoke from the Christ consciousness, an expanded state of consciousness which Jesus had, which you have if you'll expand it, and all prophets have. Speaking from that state, then they speak from the state of truth, as you can see. They spoke from that. And in Ezekiel, this is what we read. Afterwards he brought me to the gate, even the gate that looketh toward the east. And behold, the glory of the God of Israel came from the way of the east, and his voice was like the sound of many waters. He lifted his consciousness, he expanded his consciousness from attachment to this bodily vehicle to this point here, the Star of the East, if you want to call it that, the East Gate. And what did he find there? He saw the great spiritual light of God's presence. What did he hear there? He heard the cosmic sound of Om, the voice of God. Master told me one time, he said, never mind what happens to me. When I'm gone, he says, that light which you see at the Christ Center, that's far greater than I am, that's God Himself. Why are we worrying? Because we do not contact God Himself, the voice of God. That's the East Gate. To show that it was the voice of God, the Scriptures say, and the glory of God came from the way of the east, and His voice was like a noise of many waters, and the earth shined with His glory. Here, Master pointed out one time to me, earth means the body. This body shined with the light of spirit. Through the divine eye, not through some mental imagining or some thinking you hear the voice of God, nothing but your own mind carrying on. Through the divine eye in the forehead at this point, the yogi sails his consciousness into omnipresence, hearing the great word Om, the divine sound of many waters, the vibrations of light that constitute the sole reality of creation. Everything from that one light that shineth behind the darkness, and the darkness comprehendeth it not. Master used to speak often of the light beyond the atoms. That's what he was referring to. As you close your eyes first, it's darkness. But if you keep on following the techniques which God has left to you through the channel of the Master, you too will penetrate the spiritual eye into the internal kingdom and find satisfaction and salvation. No other place will you find it. So Om is the bridge between human and cosmic consciousness. That's the way you are going to get across. That's the way I'm going to get across. And if we meditate and lift our gaze here, we see the bridge. We see the spiritual eye. The Om vibration is in that. And if we merge in that and become one with it first, and then penetrate through the little star in the center, then we will prove that Om is the bridge between human and cosmic consciousness. Those who meditate deeply will do this, have done this. Why not you? That's the way. All have to go that way. Why not let's do it? Jesus said, heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words will not. Not the words of His personality, but the words of Christ's consciousness which He experienced in this state of consciousness here. We realize that the Om, or the voice, is the presence of God within you. Now, if you want any counsel, where do you go? To the worst place, over the back fence to the next door neighbor. And what advice you sometimes get. When you don't have to go that far, sit down, be quiet, lift your consciousness to this point, and with your heart and soul put behind it, feel the presence of God and the great ones in the Master, you will be advised correctly. But you do not do that. You do just the opposite thing, and you stay in outward consciousness of delusion, wherein there is no truth nor reality. These things are facts. Why not let us face them? Why not let us correct them? And so, to hear this voice of God of which we have been speaking, we have to improve our learning. Or we have to improve our knowing, as our Master used to say. To hear the voice of God first and then later merge into it, we have to use the means whereby we can hear the voice of God and not these other imaginary ways. We have to do that. We have to realize that. And remember one thing, that just because your mind tells you many things about you should do this and you should do that, and it anticipates beforehand just how God is going to answer you, that's not God's voice at all. That's your own mind with its imaginings. And we have so much of that. In Isaiah, the 55th chapter, the 8th and 9th verse, I'm not going to read them, look them up, and there you'll find the Lord says, my thoughts, my consciousness are much different than yours. Far different. You cannot understand those. My thoughts and consciousness through these outward manifestations of your mind and intellect. You cannot come anywhere near me. But that's what the majority of people do. They go within and the subconscious talks to them, tells them a few things. Voice of God. As easy as that. It is not as easy as that. But where there's sincerity and humbleness and true practice of the techniques which a saint has left, then you will contact the voice of God, and you will know, as I will read shortly from one of Master's references. So, the thing is, realize, do not follow these preconceived ideas of how God's going to answer you, because He never answers that way. He never does. And yet, if you follow with humbleness and meekness, you'll see His hand working just as sure, guiding you every step of the way. Now, how to improve our learning, how to improve our knowing, how to improve our listening, so to speak, for the voice of God. Well, I've said it many times, and we'll go on saying it many times. You have the techniques which our Master has given. There are none better. Because He knew the voice of God. He was one with that voice of God. He spoke as Jesus spoke, from Christ's consciousness, or from the voice of God. Therefore, He has left the ways and the means whereby each one of us can improve our knowing the voice of God. It simply means hearing the great cosmic sound of Om, the Comforter, the holy vibration, merging in it, finally. First, we have to attain the presence of the voice of God. We have to be in that consciousness whereby the voice can be heard. Then after that, then in His consciousness, then we have to fully surrender to Him. Then there's full merging in the voice of God. There has to be full surrender, because the voice of God is the unity of God's consciousness. The voice of conscience, even within us, is not the unity of God's presence. Because evil is in duality of consciousness. Evil sometimes later becomes something that is considered good, and vice versa. The only safety is in the unity of God's presence, in the unity of His consciousness, not in duality, because duality depends on likes and dislikes. Your father's concepts, my father's concepts, society's concepts, that is not the true voice of God. The only true voice of God is the great holy vibration, the great Om sound, and the light at this point, and the love which you feel in your heart. That's the true voice of God, and we can improve our knowing by following the techniques which our Master has left for us, the greatest perhaps of which, most simple, is the great Hong Saw technique, or the highest technique of concentration. when you one-point your thoughts and consciousness, when you do that, then the voice of God can be received by you, and not until. With this rumble going on within you, so to speak, you may want to feel the voice of God more than anything. You may want Him more than anything. But that's against the law. There's duality going on there, and God's unity of consciousness cannot be perceived. Therefore, follow one who knew the voice of God and has left the ways and the means, as our Master has, for His children to follow. You know the techniques. If you haven't, why not join the work? Attain the techniques. They're much more valuable than a lot of theory. Theory will give you ordinary knowledge, but the practice of the techniques given by one who had God realization will give you realized knowledge, which is entirely different. So let us understand these few things. As I have said, there are always two forces working within us. You know, one wants you to do the things you want to do, and the other wants you to do the things you should do. This is going on all the time. Why? Simply because we're living in the duality of consciousness. Likes and dislikes. That is what influences us most of the time. Instead of following deep within the voice of the unity of God's presence, above duality, in that you cannot go wrong. In that you will feel the presence of God. One is a negative state of consciousness. You do the things you should not do. And the other is the positive state of consciousness. You do the things you should and must do. That you can judge only when you can hear the voice of God. One of these pulls, so to speak, or these warring factors within us is that voice of duality, uncertainty, change. And you'll know you're going along nicely with it because you'll be going along nicely with the tide. No obstructions. Everything seems fine. But when you realize this isn't the way you should be going and you turn around and start back toward God, then everything happens to me. My son said to me, he said, Dad, he says, everything happens to me. I said, no, it doesn't. You're just turning now and going back toward God. Then you're meeting a resistance. Anybody can float along with the stream when there's no resistance necessary. But when you turn to go back to God, then this resistance develops. Then you feel that everything is obstructing you. It's a good thing. Welcome it. Welcome these obstructions. Only remember the Master's words, leave all else, but never God's side. Leave all else, but never God's side. What good is God when things go against you that you turn and forsake Him? He's of no value to you. No, but stick to Him then more. When things are difficult, show Him you will not leave Him, no matter what He does to you, through law. And then you will see His hand working, as no other hand will work. And so, remember the voice of duality, even though it seems to be morally correct, ethically right for you to do these things, is influenced by environment and latent tendencies. But the voice of God is not influenced by anything except truth. 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 Follow that. Society may say, oh, you do this, you do that. Never mind that. What God wants you to do, that's what we must follow and will follow. A reference now from our Master once more, as follows, from the autobiography, just to reiterate and corroborate the things which I have spoken. A human being falsely identifies himself with his physical form because the life currents from the soul are breath conveyed into the flesh. That's the same old thing of attachment. Attachment to the body is so difficult to break. These are so intense, and they're so breath conveyed with such intense power that man mistakes the effect for the cause and imagines the body to have life of its own. There is no life in the vehicle. The life is in the eternal Father. That's what we must know. Man's conscious state is an awareness of body and breath. His subconscious state, active in sleep, is associated with his mental and temporary separation from body and breath. His superconscious state is a freedom from the delusion that existence depends upon body and breath. If you can break that delusion, and you can do it by following the techniques which our Master has left, you can break the delusion that is necessary for you to breathe, and that is necessary for life. When you once break it, you'll realize your immortality is in the soul itself. And so, God lives without breath. God lives without breath. The soul made in His image becomes conscious of itself for the first time only during the breathless state. You see how deep that is? As long as you are breathing, you're identified with the breath and body. And the first time that you sit in your meditation and you feel the breath is gone, and you're fully conscious, then you'll know the soul. Now, the technique which the Master has left us, the highest technique of concentration, will enable you and everyone who sincerely follows it to prove the immortality of your soul by that simple technique, if you will do it and follow through with it. And so, finally, through self-realization, fellowship lessons, and techniques, all, not just a few, all will be able to feel the voice of God as the great Om vibration, or the Amen of our Bible, or the Amen of the Mohammedans. All, not just a few, all will be able to prove this. In the beginning you follow Om, and there's a great satisfaction comes from it. Just the comforting sound is sufficient until the soul says, no, this isn't what I want. I must go further. I've got to have more light. I've got to realize more. Then when you merge in that sound, when you merge in the voice of God, then you become not only one in an idea of being one with God, but you become one with all life itself. Because in that holy vibration is God's life and consciousness. And so do not be satisfied in your meditations at first just to hear the Om vibration, and you feel good, because even in the presence of a great man, so to speak, we feel good. But when we merge with that great man, as our Master, and felt his oneness with God, then we had something real and tangible. So do not stop with just hearing the Om sound, but penetrate and merge in it and be one with it. Then you become one with the voice of God itself. That's what we must follow. We must not forget that, because this vibration in its fullest extent is God Himself. That's the thing we do not realize. Great saints have always said that, especially Larry Masha. He said, solve all your problems by merging in the presence of God within, through the practice of Kriya Yoga, as the great voice of the Om vibration. Everything can be solved there. If God is all, He's in each and every one of us. All our problems are God's problems. Only we're afraid to give them to Him. We should welcome the chance. I know as you meditate more and more, you will not only welcome it, you'll demand that God take everything, because He is the sole doer. And so don't be content. Don't be content with the echo of the divine voice, ideas of God being with you. Don't be content with that at all. Merge in His presence and know, as the great saints have said, all I can say, God is. God is. Be one with Him. I am He. I am He. Blessed Spirit, I am He. because there's none other than God himself. Duality makes us think there are many, many ramifications of the presence of God in this and that, and a million things. There are no ramifications. It's just God alone. Of course, in your dream you can have all sorts of nightmares and things and this and that, but when you wake up in the morning and return to that consciousness which produced the dream, where are they? Where are those millions of things? And how happy you feel, especially if the dream was a little bit shady, how happy you feel when you return to that peaceful consciousness. Oh yes, here I am. I'm all right. That's God himself. That's what we must feel and understand in every moment of our existence. And so, do not be content with these echoes, so to speak, of the voice of God. But what? Commune directly with him. Commune directly with him. Read the testimony of the saints and sages. But do not stop with those echoes. But you yourself practice your meditation deep and intense and devotedly to God and commune with God. Then no one can take the voice of God away from you. You and that voice are one. You and your Father are one. And Larry Marshall was one of the greatest, perhaps one of the greatest exponents of the presence of God. He himself said, the presence of God is necessary. Being in the presence of the holy vibration is necessary. We must have that. But, he said, it must be followed with full surrender to God. Think of it. Because God is one. There is no duality in him at all. He is one. And he demands that oneness from his children if you want him. That's what Larry Marshall meant. He who gave us the great Kriya Yoga, such a wonderful technique to take you into the presence of God. But he did not fail to point out in the end it must be followed with full surrender to God. Full surrender to God. That's the key. That's the key. You will not be satisfied. I will not be satisfied until we, attaining the presence of God, follow that by merging in him completely through full surrender. I'd like to give you just a reference from Larry Marshall, what he has said, and then we will close. There are no words greater than the words of the saints and the sages, because they are directly God's manifestation to us. Our Master came here not for the fun of it. He came because there were souls who needed and wanted him. That's why he came. Because God responded to us. None other than the voice of God. Saint and sage who is not that is not worth anything. Larry Marshall said this about Larry Marshall. The great Guru Larry Marshall taught his disciples to avoid theoretical discussion of the scriptures. He only is wise that devotes himself to realizing, not reading only, the ancient revelation. Solve all your problems through meditation. Take it to God. Not in a half-hearted way, but absolutely to him, as the unity of God's consciousness within you. Your own consciousness. That's the way we should talk to him. That's the way we should worship him. So he says, solve all your problems through meditation. Exchange unprofitable religious speculations by actual God contact. I hear so much, I shouldn't say hot air, but that's what it sounds like sometimes, going on all the time about these things of God. One gentleman said he gave a great speech, and he got near the end, and he was banging the table, and he finished, and he says, well, someone opened up some of these windows and let this hot air out, he said. Well, there's so much about religious things like that. Remember Sri Chesterji said, this is not a funeral procession. Master was the greatest humorist there was. But these little things are done just to divert our attention, so we'll get this particular point. Exchange all unprofitable religious speculations for actual God contact. One moment hearing the Om and feeling the vibration of that is worth more than all the talk about religion throughout the ages. These are facts. As we read in Master's autobiography, a sage who communes with God feels oneness with him. And that means each and every one of us, we become sages when we do that. When we do that, we influence the whole universe. Think of it. Not just 2 or 3 close friends. The whole universe, because God is the one. He's the doer. And so he says, clear your mind of dogmatic theological debris. Let in the fresh healing waters of direct perception. Attune yourself to the active inner guidance. The divine voice, listen now, the divine voice has the answer to every dilemma of life. Though man's ingenuity for getting himself into trouble appears to be endless, the infinite succor is no less resourceful. God has the answer to everything. Never mind how much of a mess you're in. Never mind it. In God's consciousness, there are no messes. Just purity and his love and his devotion. And there you have from the great Larry Marshall, great exponent of Kriya Yoga. In the end, he says, take all to God. Surrender all to God and realize that God came to you and to me as our beloved Guru, the voice of God. Let us not forget that. And I'll close by reading from Whispers of Eternity, removing the cork of ignorance. No longer is my consciousness limited to a file of flesh corked with ignorance. No more do I move through thine ocean of spirit, day and night, years, incarnations, so close, yet not contacting the sea. No longer do I thoughtlessly dwell in thee, knowing and feeling thee not. Now my being is consciously merged in thine omnipresence. Having released the I-ness in me, I know that thou art I, and that thou art the souls of all.